It begins with silence, the kind of silence that only exists inside a courtroom. The air is heavy, every movement amplified. The rustle of papers, the scrape of a chair, the faint sound of footsteps on polished floors. Courtrooms are places of order, of procedure, where justice is measured and weighed. But sometimes, the very people facing judgment turn those quiet rooms into scenes of chaos. And sometimes, what happens inside those walls is so shocking, so unexpected, that it becomes impossible to forget. Imagine a man standing before the judge, appearing calm, collected, almost resigned to his fate. His charges are read, his punishment is clear. But instead of accepting justice, he decides to make a final statement. Not with words, but with something far darker. That man was Ricky Hand.
Sir, don't say something.
You can't play Jesus and God!
Hand had been arrested on multiple charges, including burglary and weapons possession. He sat in the courtroom, listening to the judge lay out his crimes, his failures, his sentence. And then, as if rehearsed, he reached down into the waistband of his prison-issued jumpsuit and pulled out something no one expected. Not a weapon in the traditional sense, not a blade or a gun, but bottles. Plastic bottles filled with his own urine and feces. With shocking precision, he began hurling them across the courtroom, splattering the walls, the floor, and nearly hitting the judge. The quiet order of the courtroom collapsed in an instant, replaced with gasps, shouts, and the chaos of deputies rushing to restrain him. One officer later said, "He had them hidden in his pants. We didn't even see it coming." The act was more than disgusting. It was symbolic. Ricky Hand wasn't just lashing out against the court. He was trying to stain the very system that had condemned him, to leave behind a final act of rebellion. It was an eruption of rage bottled up, quite literally, inside a man who couldn't handle the weight of judgment. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't a place of law anymore. It was a battlefield, where dignity and order were under attack. But Ricky Hand wasn't the only one to turn his sentencing into a spectacle. In another courtroom, another young man sat with his lawyer, awaiting his fate. His name was Christopher Teal.
Toward Birkeland, but extra security's at the ready.
My understanding from his counsel, who I'll defer to in a moment.
Without provocation, Teal punches his own attorney.
Get down! Face down! Face down!
To anyone watching, he looked like another defendant resigned to the system. But appearances can be deceiving. The judge began the proceedings, the usual monotone of justice echoing through the room. Then, without warning, Teal spun around and lashed out. Not at the judge, not at the bailiff, but at his own attorney. His fist connected with the side of the lawyer's face, sending shockwaves through the courtroom. Gasps filled the air as deputies surged forward, pinning him to the ground, dragging him away in chains. The lawyer sat stunned, hand pressed to his jaw, trying to process what had just happened. Teal had taken out his fury on the very person tasked with defending him. Later, the judge remarked, "That was a mistake you'll regret for a long time." But Teal didn't seem to care. In that moment, violence was his only answer, a final act of defiance before disappearing into a cell. What makes Christopher Teal's story so haunting is not just the punch, but what it revealed. Courtrooms are supposed to be places where reason triumphs over rage, where words are more powerful than fists. But Teal couldn't hold back. He became living proof of what unchecked anger looks like when trapped in a system that demands patience and submission. Then, there's Joseph Ziegler. His case was darker, heavier, and far more tragic. Ziegler wasn't in court for petty theft or even assault. He was there for double murder, a crime that carries the weight of life and death. The courtroom was tense that day, filled with the families of victims, reporters, and law enforcement officers. Every eye was on Ziegler as the judge prepared to deliver the ultimate sentence. And then, just like Ricky Hand and Christopher Teal, Ziegler made his move. He turned to his defense attorney, leaned forward, and with a swift motion, drove his elbow into the lawyer's face. The room erupted in chaos as deputies swarmed him, forcing him into submission. His victims' families gasped, some even screamed as the violent spectacle unfolded before them. It wasn't just an attack on his attorney. It was an attack on the very idea of representation, of fairness, of the process itself. Ziegler, convicted of taking lives, now tried to take one last piece of dignity from the system that condemned him. In a way, it was his final confession, that he had no respect for law, no regard for justice, no remorse for his crimes. And yet, even in that moment of violence, the court endured. His sentence was handed down. His fate was sealed. But the image of that sudden attack, that burst of fury in the heart of justice, is one that no one present that day will ever forget. But perhaps the most haunting of all is the story of Taylor Schabusiness. Even her name carries a strange, chilling weight. She wasn't just another defendant. She was a figure of pure chaos, whose case blurred the line between true crime and horror. Schabusiness had been charged with one of the most disturbing crimes in recent memory. The details of her offense shocked even seasoned investigators. And when she entered the courtroom, the weight of those charges hung heavy in the air. Her attorney sat beside her, carefully laying out the case, the defense, the fragile threads of hope that still remained. But then, without warning, Schabusiness snapped. In front of the judge, the jury, and a room full of spectators, she launched herself at her own lawyer. The attack was violent, frenzied, raw. Deputies rushed to restrain her, dragging her off as she snarled and fought against the very people meant to protect her. The courtroom descended into chaos once again, the air thick with fear and disbelief. Reporters would later describe the scene as surreal, like something out of a nightmare. One wrote, "It was as if the darkness of her crimes spilled directly into the courtroom." And in that moment, Schabusiness showed the world who she truly was, not just a defendant, but a storm of violence, barely contained by the walls of the justice system. 4 defendants, 4 outbursts, 4 moments that shattered the illusion of order inside the courtroom. From Ricky Hand's disgusting rebellion, to Christopher Thiel's betrayal of his own lawyer, to Joseph Ziegler's violent defiance, to Taylor Schabusiness's frenzied attack. Each case reminds us of one simple truth. Courtrooms may be designed for order, but they are not immune to chaos. And maybe that's why these stories captivate us. They show us the cracks in the system, the moments where human rage and desperation boil over, where even the stern face of justice can't contain the storm. We watch them not just for the shock, but for the reminder that justice isn't always clean, or calm, or predictable. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's violent, and sometimes it reveals the darkest sides of human nature in the very place we expect the most control. As the judge's gavel falls and the defendants are dragged away, the order of the court is restored. But for those who witness these moments, for the judges, the attorneys, the families of victims, and even the viewers watching the footage later, the memory never fades. It lingers, a reminder that justice may prevail, but it never comes easy. And that is why these 4 cases remain etched in history, not just as crimes, but as cautionary tales about rage, defiance, and the fragile line between order and chaos.